That's a great question. For anyone who can't hear the question, it's about how much of the price, or how do we know that the price itself that we pay for these really fine coffees actually translates back to the producer? It's almost as though I had a plant in the back of the room who was like, keep going, get to the point of what you're actually talking about. I will talk a little bit about that as well, how much of the price actually goes back to the producer and how we know. And the idea is that the traceability information that we have, someone said it implies a story, it implies an ethics, right? It implies some kind of relationship that exists between the person who's buying the coffee and the person who's selling it. And it implies that there's some kind of transparency along the supply chain. That's great. We're going to come back to this. Save that in your mind, in your thoughts. But this, I would like us to start thinking about why it is that we stop sharing information at the green product, and why we stop short of sharing information about what we do. And one of the things that someone said yesterday in Brisbane was, but if we put all of our information on the bag, then we're sharing proprietary information. We're sharing something about how we roast this coffee that someone else could then take and use for themselves. And I don't know if that's maybe something that's coming up for people in the audience, but if it is, maybe give me a nod. But like, we maybe don't share information because we're a little bit afraid of the competition. That's important. We're going to keep that in mind as we go. Okay. So quality and price. So we've already established a general idea that coffee that has higher traceability is usually higher quality. And then we, as a community, I think, in specialty coffee, usually say, what we want to do is pay the highest price for the highest quality coffees. We want to incentivize quality across the board, so that the most expensive coffees in the world you usually think of as being super rarefied. This kind of goes back to the question in the back, like that geisha that you buy that tastes like jasmine, florals, like this incredibly delicate, beautiful aromatic coffee that's very limited quantities and very hard to grow. We pay more money for it because it represents a lot more work on the end of the farmer. It represents a lot more risk, right? For the most part, we often equate quality and price. Now, I want to ask you guys questions about the experiences that you've had with the traceable coffees that you've bought in your past. Have you ever found that you bought a coffee that had a lot of traceability, a lot of information about the farm and the farmer and the beans themselves and the variety, and you thought that that coffee tasted bad? You didn't think it was good quality coffee. Have you had that experience? Yes, of course. Yeah. We're all a little bit jaded. Everyone's had a coffee that they didn't prefer. Now, I also want to ask if there is a minimum amount of traceability that you would allow there to be assigned to a coffee before you bought it. Like, for anyone in the audience who's a green coffee buyer, if you hit a coffee on a table that tasted great but had no traceability information, would you think twice about buying it, or would you just buy it based on cup quality? You'd buy it. Price and cup quality. Even if how would you market that coffee? If it was really high quality but it didn't have any traceability, would it be harder to market? Yeah, because you didn't have a story. And because also, if something has really high quality and a really high price but no traceability, it's hard to know where that money's going, right? Okay, so my next question is, who in this audience likes coffees from Kenya? Who buys coffees from Kenya? Lots of people. So Kenya represents a really interesting contradiction, a really interesting point at which our ideas about traceability and quality don't quite meet up. And this is part of the question asking process that I have gone through, is what do we do with coffees that score really high but have almost no traceability? So for anyone who is in the audience who's not necessarily really involved in the coffee industry or not super attuned with what certain types of coffees are like, Kenyan coffees are like some of everybody's favorite. I think coffee professionals universally say that Kenyan coffees are their favorite. They tend to be really complex, really fruity and floral, really sweet, sometimes really tart, sometimes even a little bit savory in a way that's really interesting and not weird and seaweedy like you do sometimes experience. They are really dynamic. They're mouthfuls of coffee. At the same time, The Kenyan coffee market is among the most complex in the world. The chain of custody is really long, and the chain of custody legally requires that many, many hands touch coffee before it ends up in the end sack. The thing about Kenyan coffees is that they score the highest on the cupping tables. For us at Cafe Imports, absolutely, they're routinely above 90 points. They also are the most expensive, in part because the chain of custody is so long and every person along that chain needs to get paid. There's also an auction system that's built in because of the way that the Kenyan coffee marketplace is actually established, and it has been that way since the 20s, where people go to an actual auction and bid on the coffee based on quality. The average Kenyan farmer owns between a fifth and an eighth of a hectare of land. And on that fifth to an eighth of hectare of land, they grow coffee, tea, corn, beans, cassava plants. They grow things that they need in order to live. They grow things that they need in order to sell. They bring their coffee in cherry form to a washing station for the most part. There are exceptions to this. But for the most part, they bring their cherry to a washing station. There could be 100, 500, 2,000 producers that show up to that washing station with their cherry. The cherry gets weighed, it gets sorted. That person gets an amount of money for the amount of cherry that they brought in. The cherry gets divided into different tanks, and it gets processed based on its quality, usually based on its visual quality or its like sorting quality on a float tank. That coffee gets divvied up, it gets processed in its way, it gets bagged up, and it gets shipped out. There's no way to know, there is almost no way to know, in the vast majority of Kenyan coffees in the world, whose coffee is in what bag. Which means when you hit a coffee that's a 95-point Kenyan, you cannot incentivize those producers. You cannot reward them for their quality. The marketplace is not set up for the money to go back to the producers to incentivize them and to tell them to do better, to allow them to invest in their farms, even to repeat what they've already done. Most of them have no idea if their coffee is the top of the line or the bottom of the line. Now, if we equate traceability and quality and price, how do we account for the fact that some of the most expensive and some of the best coffees in the world are almost not at all traceable down to the individual producers? And what does it mean to us that we still share information as though we have relationships with those producers? We still share elevation information. Usually it's the elevation of the washing station, by the way, the elevation of the factory. We share a general amount of the varieties that maybe people grow in Kenya. We share information about the processing that happens at the washing station. All of that information is designed in our marketing to convey something to a consumer, but very few of us actually have any real relationship with any of that information. I myself have never been to Kenya. I've never been to the Kenyan auction system. I've never been to an exporting office. My colleagues in the sensory analysis team at Cafe Imports, they will spend a couple of weeks in Kenya every year, and they'll cup 1,500 coffees. They are just cupping coffees from samples that are presented from washing stations. Those washing stations represent thousands of farmers. Those farmers do not have names to us because they do not have names except at the washing station in the most general way for bookkeeping purposes. This is where I started to think about what traceability means. What does it signal to us? And how do we rely on it as a crutch in our marketing to convey a message about the business that we're doing and the specialness of that coffee? Again, when we rely on the green coffee as the most valuable part of the process, that also means that we have responsibility for where that value is going. We don't have much control as a general marketplace over where the value is going in Kenya. And Kenya is not an exception to the rule. Most of Africa actually operates that way. Your Rwandan coffees, Burundian coffees. Then we get into Indonesia. Indonesia is almost the same way. Very, very small holder farmers who are beholden to a washing station or a factory to do the processing and to do the purchasing. This is where I started to think, what does our relationship with traceability mean? And what does it mean for the information that we're sharing with our customers? Are we still good? Have I bummed anybody out? Does everybody have a drink? Do you need a drink for the rest of this conversation? To be fair, Kenyan coffees are exceptional. They're absolutely exceptional. There's absolutely no denying that. But why? And how do we know exactly if we don't know how to identify, how to drill down to the individual producers and what their conditions are? We use traceability as a way of saying that there's a taste of place, there's something that the producer is doing that makes that coffee taste special. And when we don't know who the producers are, how do we account for that? And how can we say that it's okay in one place and not in another? Another question that I would like to ask is the interesting thing for me, and it's not really even a question, I guess I'll just give an anecdote because I don't want to call anybody out, is that we will often sell coffees that are 90, 92 points from Colombia that are regional select coffees. They are blended lots from smallholder producers. And lots of people won't buy them because there isn't traceability attached to them. They don't know who the individual farmers are. We have a very different expectation of the amount of traceability that we say is acceptable in Central and South America. We have a very different relationship with that marketplace. The same coffees, the same equivalent quality score coffees from Colombia and Kenya will be purchased in very different ways based on the traceability alone. And I think that that's really important for us to think about. Why is traceability important in the way that it is? That brings me to my next question. So now we're getting into the section that keeps me up every night. This is the part that I have nightmares about, which is marketing and ethics. Literally what I do every day is assign traceability information to coffees in order to sell them. And I have thought a lot about the impact of the work that I do and the impact of the information that I'm asking from people and the information that I'm sharing to people. Because I feel like coffee is a great chain of responsibility. And everyone in this room is here not because you didn't have anything else to do tonight, but you're here because you're really interested in coffee and you want to do the right thing. We are in specialty coffee because we think that we are doing good. I think that in my own position, I have really assumed a lot of things about the way that the specialty coffee market works and what consumers really need in order to participate in that marketplace. And it wasn't until I started to do individual beanologies, God, I hate that word, I can't wait until we retire it. And it wasn't until I started to really spend most of my time telling the story of someone else's work that I really started to ask myself, why do we need this information and what does it do to people's mindset about coffee? What does it convey about coffee? So now we're going to get into the good stuff, marketing and ethics. One of the things that has become the most significant sticking point for me is the use of photography in our marketing. Now this is an amazing photograph. I hope that you can kind of see it. It's a beautiful photograph of a woman coffee producer, woman picker, and her young child strapped to her back. It's a photo taken in Ethiopia just a few weeks ago by one of my colleagues. It's a National Geographic kind of quality photograph. Now, we use images like this on our website all the time. We use images like this in our marketing all the time. What does this image tell you about the coffee?
Fresh picked.
It's fresh picked? It's special. Why does it tell you it's special?
There's a story behind it with the photo.
What is the story behind it with the photo?
This woman is literally carrying her child as she's picking the cherries, and then that whole process until it gets to you, until you roast it, and then the customer drinks it.
Great. So the answer was that there's a story behind the photo because you see that this woman is actually picking coffee. She's doing her job so dedicatedly that she has her child strapped to her back. And then we can trace that coffee from these hands basically until the hands that produce it. But what about that implies to you that that coffee is high quality? What makes that special? The effort. The effort that we put in to get this coffee because we have this photograph. Cool. Does this tell you anything about the flavor of the coffee? Can you see the coffee itself that she's picking? Do you know if she's picking red cherries in this photograph?
She's taking a selfie.
She's taking a selfie. She's definitely not taking a selfie. This is not. Great. So one of the interesting things about this photograph, and this has come up several times on staff, and this is one of the things that I have started to do, is it's come up with, we should use that photo, it's a beautiful photo. We don't know these people's names. And I have said that we will not publish this unless we know their names and unless we've asked them for consent. Because my thought is, this little kid, I mean, I know he lives in rural Ethiopia, remote Ethiopia, but he's growing up in a time when he's going to experience access to technology at some point. And if one day he comes across a photo of his mother carrying him on his back and it's used to sell somebody's coffee, I wonder what that child would feel like. I wonder what that would feel like for him in 10 or 15 years, because we all know we've all been tagged in that photo that we regret, and you try as you might, you cannot erase it from Facebook, if anyone still uses Facebook or anything like that. So that is one thing that I absolutely think about. I also think about just the idea that these people have no control over how their images are used. If we're using this image to sell coffee, what are we using it to convey? Are we using it to convey, like some people have answered before, that the folks who are growing this coffee and picking it need us to pay more money? Like, they obviously are working really hard. In this case, the woman has to bring her child with her in order to do her job. I should buy this coffee because it's helping someone else. And that's a message that's very subliminally communicated in this particular image, I personally think. And I want us to think about the photos that we allow to be taken of us and how we allow those photos to be used. If someone comes into your cafe, someone comes into your roastery, even if you're just pouring a really beautiful latte and someone stops to take a picture of it, I've seen baristas bristle at someone taking a photo of a latte that they didn't think was perfect because they knew it was going to show up on someone's Instagram. Almost no one shows you the photo that they've taken, and almost no one tells you what they're going to use that photo for. It's the difference between the photo you post yourself and the photo you're tagged in. You never look as good in the photo you're tagged in. There's going to be photos of me from this event, and I'm going to look at them tomorrow and go, oh my God, I look like such a derp. I'm like wearing this ridiculous outfit with this ridiculous haircut. You know, and that's just me. You're not going to use this to sell anything. But if I'm a coffee farmer and you say, can I take your photo? Can I take your photo is very different from, can I take your photo and use it on my bag to sell your product? And that's what we often do. And that's no different from, can I also find out the name of your family? Can I also find out the history of your farm? Can I also find out the elevation, the exact geographic location of your farm so I can put a Google map on my website? Can I find out the name of your farm? But also I'm going to share all this information publicly with my consumers, with other roasters, with other importers, but don't sell to anybody else. Only sell to me, because now we have a relationship.